When my daughter shouted, "You will either serve my husband or get out of my house," I did not respond in anger. Instead, I smiled, took my suitcase and left, leaving behind the house I had paid for with my life. She was waiting for me to break down, as usual, but this time everything was different. A week later, I had 22 missed calls, and that was far from the end of my plan. They will regret their words and their actions. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My keys were still warm in my palm when I pushed through the front door, grocery bags cutting into my wrists. The Saturday afternoon light filtered through the living room curtains, casting everything in that soft spring glow that usually made me smile. Not today. Harry was sprawled in my leather recliner, Martha's last gift to me before the cancer took her. His stockinged feet were propped up, a half-empty beer bottle dangling from his fingers. The remote control rested on his belly, like he owned the place, which I suppose he thought he did. Old man, he didn't even look up from the basketball game. Grab me another beer from the fridge while you're up. I set the grocery bags down slowly, feeling the weight of the milk cartons and bread loaves. The plastic handles had left red marks across my palms. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Harry's eyes stayed fixed on the television screen. "Corona, not that cheap stuff you drink." Something cold settled in my chest. I'd bought those Coronas specifically for him. Spent my Social Security money on beer I'd never touch. "Harry, I just walked in. I need to put these groceries away." Now he looked at me. His face carried that familiar expression, the one that said I was being unreasonable. Difficult. "What's the big deal? You're already standing. I'm comfortable." "The big deal is that this is my house." Harry's feet hit the floor with a thud. He stood slowly, using his height advantage like a weapon. At 30, he was bigger than me, broader, but I'd been dealing with difficult people long before he was born. "Your house? Funny. Because your daughter and I live here. We pay the bills. With my money. Details." He stepped closer, beer still in hand. "Look, Clark, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You want to keep living here peacefully? You play ball. Simple as that." The kitchen door swung open. Tiffany appeared, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dish towel in her hands. She took in the scene. Harry standing over me, the tension thick enough to choke on. "What's going on?" Her voice carried that warning tone I remembered from her teenage years. "Your father's being difficult," Harry said without taking his eyes off me. "I asked him to get me a beer, and he's making it into some kind of federal case." Tiffany looked at me with disappointment, like I was a child acting out. "Dad, just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." But Harry wasn't done. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "See, Clark, here's how it's going to work. You live in our house. You contribute. That means when I ask you to do something, you do it. No questions, no attitude." "Our house?" I kept my voice level, even though my heart was hammering. "That's right." Tiffany stepped beside her husband, presenting a united front. "Dad, you need to decide, right now. Either you help Harry and do what he asks, or you can pack your things and leave." The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at my daughter, searching for any hint of the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. She stared back with Harry's same entitled expression. "All right," I said quietly. Harry smirked, thinking he'd won. "Good. Now, about that beer." "I'll pack." The smirk died on his face. Tiffany's mouth fell open slightly, like she'd expected me to crumble, to apologize and shuffle to the kitchen like a beaten dog. I turned toward the hallway, leaving the grocery bags where they sat. Behind me, I heard Harry's sharp intake of breath. Tiffany's whispered, "Dad, wait." But I was already walking toward my bedroom, my footsteps steady on the hardwood floor. Martha and I had refinished together 20 years ago. The suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a soft thump. I'd bought it for our honeymoon to Yellowstone, back when Martha was still alive and the future stretched ahead like an open road. Now it gaped empty on the bed, waiting to swallow what remained of my life in this house. I packed methodically. Underwear, socks, 3 changes of clothes. Not everything, just enough. From the living room came the low murmur of urgent whispers, Harry's voice rising occasionally above Tiffany's softer tones. They were figuring out what to do, how to handle the old man's unexpected rebellion. My hands moved without conscious thought, folding shirts and rolling ties. The photo of Martha went into the side pocket, wrapped in tissue paper. My medications. Reading glasses, the small leather journal where I tracked expenses. When I wheeled the suitcase down the hallway, they stopped talking. Harry had returned to his chair, but his posture was different now. Alert, watchful. Tiffany stood by the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, trying to look stern but failing to hide her uncertainty. Neither of them said goodbye. The car started on the first try, my old Buick reliable as always. I backed out of the driveway without looking at the house, without seeing if they were watching from the window. The 30-minute drive to Pine Lodge gave me time to think. The memories came in waves as I drove through downtown Kalispell. Tiffany's college tuition, $40,000 a year for that fancy private school she'd insisted on. I'd worked overtime at the bank for 4 straight years, taking on extra clients, staying late to review loan applications. My hands cramped just remembering all those forms. Her wedding had cost $25,000. Harry's family couldn't afford their half, so I'd covered it quietly, not wanting to embarrass anyone. The reception hall, the flowers, her dress, everything had to be perfect for my little girl's special day. Then came the house. $80,000 from my retirement savings for their down payment, because young couples needed help getting started. That's what fathers did, I told myself. That's what Martha would have wanted. The monthly payments followed like clockwork. $1,200 for their mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when money got tight. My Social Security check disappeared into their lives piece by piece, and I'd convinced myself it was love. Pine Lodge Motel sat on the outskirts of town, a low building with faded paint and a neon sign that flickered intermittently. The room was small but clean. A bed, a chair, a tiny table by the window. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat heavily on the mattress edge. The silence was different here. Not the comfortable quiet of my own home, but the hollow emptiness of a temporary space. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts. Bank numbers, insurance companies, credit card services. Numbers I knew by heart from 30 years in finance. Tomorrow was Sunday, but some things could still be done. Some calls could still be made. I opened my laptop on the small table and logged into my online banking. Account balances glowed on the screen. Checking, savings, retirement accounts, numbers that represented a lifetime of careful planning, of denying myself small luxuries so I could take care of my family. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting for me to decide what came next. Sunday morning arrived gray and overcast, fitting my mood perfectly. I spread my paperwork across the motel table, like a general planning a campaign. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents. Everything organized, everything within reach. The first call went to First National Bank. Sunday banking was limited, but automated systems never slept. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the representative said after I navigated through the phone tree. "How can I help you today?" "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 847 Pine Street, the account ending in 4729. A pause. Computer keys clicking. "Sir, I show that payment has been active for 5 years. Are you sure you want to discontinue it?" "Completely sure." "May I ask the reason for the change?" "The homeowners no longer qualify for my financial assistance." More clicking. "Very well, Mr. Miller. The automatic payment will be canceled effective immediately. You should receive written confirmation within 3 business days." The second call was easier. Geico had been insuring both their cars on my policy for 3 years. Harry's Silverado, Tiffany's Honda. $280 every month for vehicles I never drove. Coverage for accidents I'd never cause. "I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy," I told the agent. "My daughter and son-in-law will need to establish their own coverage." "When would you like this change to take effect?" "Today." The credit cards took longer. Tiffany was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts: Visa, MasterCard, and the store card from Costco. $500 monthly I'd been paying on balances I'd never created, purchases I'd never made. "Mr. Miller, removing authorized users will require them to apply for their own credit," the Visa representative explained. "Any outstanding balances will remain your responsibility, but they won't be able to make new charges." I understand. Remove them immediately. Each call felt like lifting a weight from my shoulders. 30 years of banking experience had taught me the system's ins and outs, the legal language, the proper procedures. Everything I was doing was completely within my rights. The life insurance change required written documentation, but I started the process. $100,000 that was supposed to go to Tiffany, money I'd earned to protect my family's future. But family meant something different now. By noon, I'd made 8 calls. Mortgage payments stopped. Insurance canceled. Credit cards blocked. The automatic transfers that had been bleeding my accounts dry for years. All of it ended with polite conversations and confirmation numbers. I sat back in the cheap motel chair and looked at my notes. Confirmation numbers, reference codes, effective dates. The paper trail of financial independence. My phone sat silent on the table. No missed calls, no urgent messages. They didn't know yet. Probably wouldn't know until the first payment bounced. The first bill arrived with their names on it instead of mine, but they would know soon enough. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Across the parking lot, an elderly man was loading suitcases into a pickup truck, his wife directing the operation with gentle efficiency. Probably heading home from visiting grandchildren, or maybe starting a long-postponed vacation. I envied their easy partnership, the way they moved around each other with practiced familiarity. Martha and I had been like that once. My phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. I let it ring. The week passed quietly for me, but apparently not for them. I'd settled into a routine at Pine Lodge. Coffee from the lobby, breakfast at the diner down the street, long walks around Kalispell's quiet neighborhoods. My phone accumulated missed calls, like a collection I had no interest in starting. By Wednesday, there were 12 messages. By Friday, 22. I listened to them in chronological order, watching the progression from confusion to anger to desperation. The first few were almost casual. Tiffany asking if there was some kind of banking error with the mortgage payment. Harry leaving brief, annoyed messages about the car insurance lapsing, but by the middle of the week, panic had crept in. Dad, what the hell is going on? Tiffany's voice cracked with frustration. The bank says you stopped the automatic payment. They want the full amount by Friday, or they'll start foreclosure proceedings. Harry's messages grew increasingly aggressive. Clark, you need to fix this shit right now. I've got people asking questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats. The later calls bordered on begging. Tiffany crying, promising they'd work something out if I'd just call them back. Harry trying a different approach, claiming he'd been too harsh and wanted to make things right. I deleted each message after listening, feeling nothing but mild curiosity about their growing desperation. Thursday morning brought a knock at my motel room door. Through the peephole, I saw them both. Tiffany in a wrinkled sweater, Harry in his work clothes, both looking like they'd slept badly. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Dad. Tiffany's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual composure cracked. We need to talk. About what? Harry pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about beer. I'm not trying to ruin anything, I said calmly. I'm simply no longer paying for your lives. The mortgage, Clark. Harry's voice rose. You can't just stop paying the mortgage. That's our house. Actually, it's my house, my name on the deed, my signature on the loan. You two were just guests. Tiffany grabbed Harry's arm as he stepped closer to the door. Dad, please. We can work this out. Harry was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were. But you can't just leave us with no warning, no discussion. You gave me an ultimatum, I reminded her. Do what Harry says or get out. Those were your exact words. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. I looked at my daughter, seeing a stranger wearing her face. You meant every word. You just didn't expect me to choose option 2. Harry tried a different approach, his voice artificially calm. Look, we all said things we didn't mean. But you're talking about our home, our credit, our whole lives. You can't just pull the rug out like this. I can, and I did. I started to close the door. You wanted me to leave. I left. You wanted to handle your own lives. Now you can. Dad, wait. Tiffany's voice broke. What about family? What about everything we've been through together? I paused, looking at her desperate face. For a moment, I remembered the little girl who used to help me rake leaves in the fall, who brought me dandelions she'd picked from the yard. But that little girl had grown into someone who could stand by while her husband humiliated her father in his own living room. Family works both ways, sweetheart, I said quietly. I spent 5 years taking care of you both. When it was time for you to take care of me, you chose him instead. Harry's fake composure cracked. You crazy old bastard, you can't just... I can call the police if you keep raising your voice, I interrupted. This is private property, and you're disturbing the peace. They stared at me, probably seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not the soft-hearted father and grandfather-to-be, not the convenient bank account with legs, just a man who'd finally learned to say no. Harry grabbed Tiffany's elbow. Come on, we'll figure this out ourselves. They walked back to their car, Harry's swagger replaced by worried hunching, Tiffany looking back over her shoulder like she was seeing a stranger. I watched them drive away, then closed the door and returned to my laptop. There were still calls to make, still accounts to close. The work of dismantling a relationship was far from finished. I needed coffee and a chance to think clearly. The diner on Main Street had always been my refuge when Martha was alive. She'd meet me there after her doctor appointments, and we'd split a piece of apple pie while discussing nothing important. Tuesday morning found me walking the familiar 3 blocks, my breath visible in the crisp mountain air. The routine felt grounding after yesterday's confrontation. I'd organized my paperwork again this morning, reviewing bank statements and confirmation numbers like a general studying battle plans. The diner's bell chimed as I entered. Coffee steam and bacon grease created that comfortable fog of normalcy I craved. I'd barely settled into my usual corner booth when a familiar voice called out, Clark Miller. Well, I'll be damned. Bob Harrison rose from a table near the window, newspaper folded under his arm. We'd worked together at First National for 15 years before his transfer to the main branch. Bob had handled commercial loans while I managed personal accounts, but we'd shared enough coffee breaks to consider ourselves friends. Bob, I stood to shake his hand. Good to see you. Mind if I join you? Haven't seen you since Martha's service. He slid into the opposite seat without waiting for an answer. Heard you moved out to Pine Lodge. Everything all right? The waitress appeared with coffee before I could answer. I used the interruption to consider how much to share. Bob was trustworthy, but he was also a banker with professional obligations. Family situation, I said finally, needed some space to think things through. Bob nodded slowly, studying my face. That son-in-law of yours tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back. My coffee cup stopped, halfway to my lips. What kind of fast one? Wanted a home equity loan on your house, $50,000. Bob's expression darkened. Claimed it was his property, brought in documentation and everything. The diner's ambient noise seemed to fade. My house? He said he owned my house? That's right. Had some paperwork that looked official at first glance, but when we ran the title search... Bob shook his head. Everything came back to you, of course. Clean title, no co-signers, nothing that would give him any claim to the property. I set my cup down carefully, processing this information. When exactly did this happen? December, maybe January. I handled the application personally because of the amount involved. Bob leaned forward, lowering his voice. Clark, he wasn't just mistaken about ownership. This was deliberate fraud. The documents he brought in were forged. The implications hit me like cold water. 3 months ago, Harry had been planning to steal from me. This wasn't desperation born from our current crisis. This was premeditated deception. Did you report it? We rejected the application and flagged his information in our system. Technically, since no money changed hands, it's a gray area, legally. But I kept copies of everything. Bob studied my expression. You really didn't know about this? I shook my head, thinking about all those monthly payments I'd been making, all the dinners where Harry had complained about money troubles while planning to rob me behind my back. What was he going to use the money for? Bob glanced around the diner, then leaned closer. According to his application, home improvements. But word around town is Harry's got gambling debts, pretty substantial ones. How substantial? Jim Morrison might know more. You remember Detective Morrison? He mentioned something about Harry being a regular at Glacier Peaks Casino. I did remember Jim Morrison. We'd served on the church building committee together, and his daughter had been in Tiffany's graduating class. If Jim had information about Harry's gambling, it was probably accurate. Bob, I appreciate you telling me this. I pulled out my wallet to pay for coffee I'd barely touched. Clark, be careful. A man who'd forged documents to steal from family might do other desperate things when he's cornered. I walked back to Pine Lodge with my mind racing. Harry's beer demand and disrespect suddenly made more sense. He'd already seen me as a mark, a convenient source of cash for his gambling habit. The ultimatum wasn't about establishing dominance. It was about maintaining access to money he believed he was entitled to steal. Back in my motel room, I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Harry Thompson Evidence. Bob's revelation was just the beginning. If Harry had been lying about this, what else had he been hiding? The courthouse closed at 5 p.m. I had 1 hour to file the paperwork that would change everything. After lunch, I'd driven straight from the diner to the Flathead County Courthouse, an imposing brick building that had intimidated me as a young man but now seemed like an ally. The clerk's office was on the second floor, staffed by a middle-aged woman who processed my eviction notice with professional efficiency. "Mr. Miller, you understand this is your daughter's residence?" She reviewed the property deed I'd provided, comparing it to the eviction documents. "It's my property. The residents have violated the terms of their occupancy." "What terms would those be?" I'd prepared for this question. "Verbal agreement requiring mutual respect and contribution to household expenses." "Both conditions have been breached." She stamped the papers with practiced authority. 30-day notice period begins today. If they contest, we'll schedule a hearing. Otherwise, the sheriff will serve final papers after the deadline. "How long before they receive this?" "Sheriff's Department handles service of process, usually within 48 hours. I thanked her and collected my copies, feeling the weight of legal authority behind my actions. No more financial manipulation or emotional blackmail. Everything was going through proper channels. Now, my next stop was the police station. Detective Jim Morrison's office was tucked in the back corner of the building, a cramped space dominated by filing cabinets and coffee-stained paperwork. Jim had aged since I'd last seen him. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still firm. "Clark, what brings you to my corner of the world?" "Information gathering. Bob Harrison mentioned you might know something about Harry Thompson's gambling activities." Jim's expression shifted to professional interest. "Your son-in-law? What's the context here?" I explained the situation briefly. The ultimatum, my departure, the discovery of Harry's attempted loan fraud. Jim listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "Harry's definitely known at Glacier Peaks," Jim said when I finished. "Regular player, usually at the poker tables. Staff mentioned he's been more frequent lately, playing higher stakes." "Any idea how much he owes?" "Different creditors, different amounts. We've had calls about collection issues. Nothing criminal yet, but heading that direction. I'd estimate 18 to 20,000 total." The number staggered me. Harry had been living in my house, eating my food, demanding my respect, while secretly burning through enough money to buy a decent car. Who are these creditors? Mix of legitimate lenders and less savory characters. The legitimate ones are getting impatient. The others, Jim shrugged. Let's just say they don't usually involve law enforcement in their collection methods. What's the timeline looking like? He's been stalling for about 6 weeks. Most creditors will give someone 3 months before escalating. Harry's running out of road. I left the police station with a clearer picture of my son-in-law's situation. The gambling explained his desperation, his attempt to fraudulently mortgage my house, and his increasing aggression toward me. I wasn't just a convenient funding source. I was his only hope of avoiding serious consequences. That evening, I sat in my motel room reviewing the day's progress. Legal eviction notice filed and ready for service. Confirmation of Harry's gambling debts and fraudulent activities. A growing network of professional allies who understood the real situation. I opened my laptop and updated my evidence file, adding Jim Morrison's information to Bob Harrison's revelations. Pattern recognition had been a crucial skill in banking, and the patterns here were becoming crystal clear. Harry wasn't just disrespectful or entitled. He was desperate, dishonest, and dangerous. The more pressure he felt, the more reckless he would become. I needed to be ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow, I would start making strategic phone calls to Harry's creditors. Not to pay his debts, Those consequences were his to face, but to ensure they knew his true financial situation, including the fact that he had no legal claim to my property. The truth was always the best weapon. Word travels fast in a town like Kalispell. By Friday, I realized it was time to control the narrative. My first encounter happened at the post office, where Mrs. Henderson from the church mailing committee cornered me near the stamp machine. She was one of those women who collected information like others collected recipes, always ready to share what she'd learned. "Clark, dear, I've been hearing troubling things about family troubles. Is everything all right?" I considered my response carefully. Mrs. Henderson would repeat whatever I said to at least a dozen people by Sunday service. Tiffany and Harry asked me to move out, so I did. Sometimes adult children need to handle their own responsibilities. Her eyebrows rose. "They asked you to leave your own house?" It seemed like the best solution for everyone involved. "But didn't you pay for their wedding and help them with the down payment?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I always wondered how they afforded that house on Harry's salary." I nodded but didn't elaborate. The facts would speak for themselves. My next stop was Miller's Hardware, where I'd worked part-time after retiring from the bank. Tom Kowalski, the owner, looked up from his inventory sheets with genuine concern. "Clark, heard you're staying out at Pine Lodge. What's going on?" 3 other employees gathered around as I explained the situation. Their reactions were immediate and unanimous. Shock that Harry had treated me so disrespectfully. Anger that I'd been supporting them financially for years without recognition. "You paid for their college tuition?" Dave, the assistant manager, shook his head in disbelief. "Harry told everyone his family was well off. Said they were helping you with mortgage payments." "Harry said a lot of things that weren't true," I replied calmly. Tom's expression darkened. "That explains why he always seemed to have money but never worked overtime. We offered him extra shifts plenty of times, but he always had other commitments." "Those commitments were probably at the casino," muttered Sarah from the paint counter. By the time I left the hardware store, I knew the real story would be all over town within hours. Kalispell's small-town network was more efficient than any advertising campaign. My third stop was St. Mark's Lutheran Church, where Pastor Williams was preparing for the weekend services. He invited me into his office, offering coffee and a chair that had comforted many troubled parishioners over the years. "Clark, several people have mentioned they're concerned about you. Can you help me understand what's happening?" I appreciated Pastor Williams' direct approach. He wasn't fishing for gossip. He was trying to help a member of his congregation. "Pastor, I've been financially supporting my daughter and son-in-law for 5 years. Last weekend they made it clear that my presence in the house was conditional on my following Harry's orders. I chose to leave, rather than accept that arrangement. That must have been incredibly painful." "It was clarifying," I said honestly. "I love my daughter, but I won't be treated like a servant in my own home." Pastor Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes loving someone means allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. It sounds like you've been protecting them from those consequences for a long time." "Too long, I think." During my walk back to the motel, I stopped at Annie's coffee shop for an afternoon cup. The place was busy with the usual Friday crowd. Retirees, off-duty workers, mothers with strollers. I found a small table in the corner and listened to the conversations flowing around me. Heard Harry owes money all over town. "Clark Miller's been paying their bills for years." Always seemed odd how they lived so well on his salary. The information was spreading exactly as I'd expected. Small towns were like organisms. They processed information quickly and efficiently, separating truth from fiction through collective wisdom. My phone rang as I was leaving the coffee shop. Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor for 20 years. "Clark, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted you to know there's been a lot of shouting at the house lately. Mostly Harry, but Tiffany too. Yesterday the police drove by twice. Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Patterson. I appreciate you keeping an eye on things. Are you safe where you're staying? Do you need anything?" The genuine concern in her voice reminded me that community support came in many forms. "I'm fine, thank you. Just taking things one day at a time." That evening I sat in my motel room reviewing the day's conversations. The social pressure was building naturally, without any vindictive effort on my part. People simply recognized injustice when they saw it clearly. My phone rang again. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. One of Harry's creditors, most likely. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. This is Marcus Webb from Frontier Financial Services. We're looking for Harry Thompson regarding a past due account. Please call us at your earliest convenience. They were calling me because Harry had probably listed my house as his address on credit applications. More evidence of his deception, more proof that he'd been planning to make me responsible for his debts. I deleted the message and opened my laptop. Time to update my evidence file with today's discoveries. I should have expected them to fight back. Harry never was one to go down quietly. Saturday morning started peacefully enough. I was reviewing bank statements over coffee when my phone began ringing. First Tom from the hardware store, then Mrs. Henderson, then Pastor Williams. Each call brought the same disturbing news. Harry was making rounds through town, spreading an alternative version of events. "Clark, I think you need to know what he's saying." Tom's voice carried barely controlled anger. "He came in here about an hour ago, loud as you please, telling everyone you abandoned them without warning. Claims you promised to always take care of them, then changed your mind out of spite." "What exactly did he say?" "That you're having some kind of mental breakdown. Said you threw them out because Tiffany wouldn't let you control every decision in their lives." Tom paused. "He's also claiming there's a family medical emergency that requires money, and you're refusing to help." I thanked Tom and hung up, my mind already working through the implications. Harry was desperate enough to launch a public relations campaign, which meant the pressure from his creditors was intensifying. The next call confirmed my suspicions. "Mr. Miller, this is Detective Morrison. I wanted to give you a heads up. Harry Thompson was here this morning filing a complaint about elder abuse. Claims you're being manipulated by someone at the bank to make bad financial decisions." "Elder abuse? Complete nonsense, of course. But he's trying to create an official record of your supposed mental incompetence. I told him we'd need medical documentation and witness statements, which he obviously can't provide. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Tiffany's number. "Dad, please pick up. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand." Her voice was thick with tears. "I'm pregnant, Dad. The stress from all this is making me sick. The doctor says if things don't calm down, I could lose the baby." I felt a familiar twist in my stomach, the same protective instinct that had made me vulnerable to their manipulation for years. But something in her tone seemed rehearsed, desperate in a calculated way. "Congratulations on the pregnancy, sweetheart. When did you find out?" "Last week, right before everything fell apart." Her voice broke convincingly. "Dad, I can't lose my baby because of money problems?" "You always said family comes first." "Family does come first. That's why I spent $60,000 on your education and $25,000 on your wedding." "But what about now? What about your grandchild?" The question hung in the air. If she was really pregnant, if there was really a medical crisis, then my actions could have unintended consequences. But the timing seemed too convenient, the emotional manipulation too practiced. "Tiffany, have you seen a doctor about these pregnancy complications?" A pause. "I have an appointment next week." "Which doctor?" "Dr. Richards at the women's clinic." I knew Dr. Richards. Martha had seen her for years. "I'll call her office to see how I can help with medical expenses." "Dad, you don't need to call. If there's a genuine medical emergency involving my grandchild, I want to help. Dr. Richards will know the best way to handle things." Tiffany's voice became sharp. "You can't just call my doctor. That's private information. You're right. You can have her call me directly to discuss payment options." The call ended abruptly. An hour later, I was walking downtown when I encountered Harry outside the First National Bank. He was talking loudly to anyone who would listen, his voice carrying that aggressive edge I'd learned to recognize. "He's lost his mind," Harry was saying to a small crowd of customers. "Senile old man thinks everyone's trying to steal from him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out of the house over nothing." I approached calmly, and the crowd noticed me before Harry did. Faces turned in my direction, expressions shifting as they recognized the subject of Harry's rant. Harry spun around, his face flushing red. "There he is, the man who abandoned his own family." "Hello, Harry." I kept my voice level. "How's the gambling debt situation working out?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow. Several people in the crowd murmured among themselves, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "You're crazy," Harry sputtered. "I don't know what you're talking about." $18,000, according to Detective Morrison. Glacier Peaks Casino. mostly poker tables. I looked at the gathering crowd. Amazing how much money someone can lose when they're not paying their own living expenses. Harry's face went from red to purple. He stepped closer, using his height advantage like a weapon. You senile old bastard, you can't just... I can document every dollar I've spent supporting you for 5 years, I interrupted. Can you document where your paychecks went? The crowd was listening intently now. Processing this new information, Harry realized he'd lost control of the narrative. Come on, he growled, pushing through the crowd. This isn't over, Clark. I watched him storm away, noting how several people pulled out their phones. The real story would be all over social media within the hour. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and began documenting the day's events. Harry's counterattack was failing because it was built on lies that couldn't withstand scrutiny. The community knew my character too well to believe his accusations of mental incompetence or vindictive abandonment. But the pregnancy claim worried me. If Tiffany was really pregnant, the situation became more complicated. I needed verification before making my next move. I picked up my phone and dialed Dr. Richards's office. If there was a real medical emergency, I would help, but I wouldn't be manipulated by fabricated crises. Harry's public threats had crossed a line. I walked back to my motel room, pulled out my phone, and called Detective Morrison. James, we need to talk. Harry's behavior today showed a pattern of escalation that concerns me. How so? He confronted me publicly, made threatening gestures in front of witnesses, and his whole demeanor suggested someone losing control. I looked out my motel window toward downtown. I'd like to file a formal complaint and explore protection options. Come in tomorrow morning. Bring any documentation you have. But I didn't need to wait until morning. Steve Brennan, the Pine Lodge night manager, knocked on my door an hour later. Mr. Miller, that man who was yelling in our parking lot earlier, he came back about 20 minutes ago, stood outside your door for maybe 5 minutes, then left, made some guests nervous. Steve was a retired Army sergeant who'd seen enough trouble to recognize it developing. Did he say anything specific? Muttered something about teaching old fools lessons. I've got it on security video if you need it. Security footage, physical evidence of Harry's threatening behavior on private property. Steve, would you be willing to provide that footage to the police? Absolutely. Guy like that shouldn't be intimidating elderly residents. The next morning, I arrived at the police station with Steve's security, USB drive, and a written timeline of Harry's escalating behavior. Detective Morrison reviewed everything with professional thoroughness. Clark, this shows a clear pattern of intimidation. Combined with what I witnessed yesterday at the bank, we have grounds for a restraining order. What would that involve? Legal prohibition against Harry coming within 500 feet of you or your property? Violation means immediate arrest. Jim leaned back in his chair. There's something else you should know. Harry consulted with a lawyer Friday about adverse possession laws. The words hit me like cold water. Squatters' rights. Exactly. He was researching whether he could claim legal ownership of your house based on living there continuously. Jim's expression was grim. Montana requires 5 years of hostile occupation. They've been there 3 years. He was planning to wait 2 more years, then file a claim. The implications staggered me. Harry hadn't just been freeloading. He'd been executing a long-term plan to steal my family home through legal technicalities. Does he have any legitimate claim? None whatsoever. Adverse possession requires hostile occupation without the owner's permission. Since you gave them permission to live there and they never paid rent or property taxes, there's no legal basis. Jim pulled out a file folder. But it shows premeditation. He's been planning this theft for years. What about the restraining order? I can fast-track it given the evidence. You'll have it by this afternoon. I left the police station with a new understanding of my son-in-law's character. The beer incident hadn't been about establishing dominance. It had been about maintaining a deception that would culminate in stealing my home. Walking back to my car, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Time to make some strategic calls. The first was to Marcus Webb at Frontier Financial Services, one of Harry's creditors who'd been calling my number. Mr. Webb, I'm returning your call about Harry Thompson. I need to clarify something important. He doesn't live at my address anymore and has no legal claim to my property. He listed that address as his residence on all credit applications. He was a guest in my home. I evicted him last week. If you're looking for him, he works at Mountain View Auto Dealership on Highway 93. The second call was to Continental Credit Recovery. This is Clark Miller. You've been calling about Harry Thompson's debts. I want to clarify that Mr. Thompson has no ownership interest in my property and is no longer residing there. Each call was brief and factual. I wasn't paying Harry's debts or providing personal information, just correcting the false address he'd been using to avoid his creditors. By noon, I'd contacted 6 different collection agencies. Harry's carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. That afternoon, Judge Morrison signed my restraining order. Harry Thompson was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Violation would result in immediate arrest and possible jail time. I drove back to Pine Lodge feeling the satisfaction of justice properly applied. Harry had spent 3 years planning to steal my home. Now he couldn't even approach it legally. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, old man." I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison, then blocked the number. Evidence collection had become second nature. Monday morning, I filed the restraining order. By noon, I was watching Harry's world collapse from multiple directions. The courthouse clerk stamped the final copy with efficient authority. "Mr. Miller, this order is effective immediately. Any contact or approach within 500 feet constitutes a violation." I thanked her and walked to my car, knowing the sheriff's deputy would serve Harry the papers within hours. My phone was already ringing. "Clark, this is Mike Brennan from Mountain View Auto." Mike was Harry's boss, a decent man who'd built his dealership on reputation and trust. "I need to ask you something directly. Are the things Harry's been saying about you true?" "What has he been saying?" "That you had some kind of breakdown and threw him out because of dementia. That there's a family medical emergency and you're refusing to help." Mike's voice carried skepticism. "Thing is, Clark, I've known you for 20 years. This doesn't sound like the man who co-signed my son's first car loan." "Mike, Harry gave me an ultimatum to obey his orders, or leave. I chose to leave. There's no medical emergency, and my mental faculties are fine, as my banker, lawyer, and police detective can confirm." A long pause. I was afraid of that. "Clark, I've got 3 customers today who mentioned Harry owing them money. One recognized him from the casino. This is affecting my business." "I understand. I'm going to have to let him go. Can't have this kind of controversy around customers who trust us with major purchases." 20 minutes later, I was having coffee at Annie's when I saw the first debt collector pull up to my former house, Continental Credit Recovery, based on the magnetic door sign. I'd spoken with them Friday about Harry's false address claims. My phone rang. "Tiffany's number? Dad, there are men at the house asking about Harry's debts. They want to know about our assets, our income, everything." Her voice carried genuine panic now. "What did you tell them?" I told them the truth, that Harry doesn't own my property and no longer lives there. "But they're talking about garnishing wages, seizing assets." "Dad, I don't understand any of this." "Sweetheart, that's what happens when someone borrows money they can't repay. Those are consequences Harry created, not me." "He owes $18,000? How is that possible?" So she really hadn't known the full extent. Gambling debts? Glacier Peaks Casino, according to Detective Morrison. Silence on the line, then quietly, "He told me he was working overtime those nights." "I'm sorry you're learning this way, Tiffany." And the sheriff's deputy was here too. Served Harry some kind of legal papers. He's been ranting and throwing things ever since. The restraining order. Harry was probably just realizing that his options had evaporated completely. "Dad, he's talking about leaving town. Says there's nothing left here for him." Her voice cracked. "What am I supposed to do?" "Make decisions based on who Harry really is, not who you hoped he was." That evening I parked across the street from my former house and watched the chaos unfold. 3 different creditor vehicles had visited during the day. Mrs. Patterson next door waved at me sadly. She'd been watching the situation develop with the concern of a longtime neighbor. Through the living room window, I could see Harry and Tiffany arguing. His gestures were aggressive, desperate. Hers looked defensive, frightened. The fairy tale marriage built on my financial foundation was crumbling as reality intruded. My phone buzzed, a text from Steve at Pine Lodge. That guy tried to get in the building again, told him about the restraining order. He left, but he was really angry. I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison. Harry was violating the restraining order within hours of being served. His desperation was making him reckless, which made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. A desperate man with gambling debts, no job, and legal troubles had limited options. He could face his responsibilities like an adult, or he could run. Given what I'd learned about Harry's character, running seemed most likely. I drove back to Pine Lodge considering the implications. If Harry fled town to escape his creditors, what would happen to Tiffany? Would she go with him, choosing loyalty to a man who deceived her for years? Or would she finally see him clearly and make a different choice? Either way, the consequences were theirs to face. I'd spent 5 years protecting them from reality. That protection had ended the day they asked me to choose between my dignity and their demands. I'd chosen dignity. Now they could choose their own path forward. 2 days of watching their desperation was enough. I called Tiffany Wednesday morning and told her to meet me at the diner. Just her. I can't leave Harry alone right now, Dad. He's really struggling with everything that's happening. Then we have nothing to discuss. The restraining order means I can't be around him anyway. A long pause. Where do you want to meet? Main Street Diner, 2 o'clock, back corner. Booth where we can talk privately. I arrived early and chose the booth facing away from the street. I wanted this conversation to focus on words, not worried glances at passing cars. When Tiffany arrived, she looked older than her 28 years. Stress lines around her eyes, nervous fidgeting with her purse strap, she slid into the opposite seat and immediately started talking. Dad, I know you're angry, but Harry's lost his job, and these debt collectors won't leave us alone. The phone rings constantly. People are showing up at the door demanding money we don't have. I waited until she finished, then spoke calmly. I'm offering you one chance to end this with some dignity, Tiffany. What do you mean? Public acknowledgement of the truth. Full disclosure of how much I've supported you both, and an honest explanation of why I left. Her face flushed. You want me to humiliate myself in front of the whole town? I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference. What kind of acknowledgement? I'd spent 2 days thinking through exactly what justice required. Church announcement Sunday during testimony time. Letter to the editor of the Tribune. Facebook post visible to all our mutual connections. Full details about college tuition, wedding costs, mortgage payments, and the ultimatum that caused me to leave. Dad, people will think you had a father who loved you enough to sacrifice his retirement security for your happiness, and that you took it for granted until it was gone. Tiffany stared at her untouched coffee. What about Harry? Harry is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you choose to stay married to him, that's your decision, but it means choosing him over any relationship with me. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father. I'm asking you to choose between a man who threatened me and a man who raised you. The fact that you see those as equivalent choices tells me everything about how far we've drifted apart. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. What about the house? It's been in our family for generations. It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. 3 families of veterans will live there. People who understand what service and sacrifice actually mean. The words hit her like a physical blow. The will? Already changed, witnessed, signed, and filed with my attorney. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Even if you do everything I've asked perfectly, the house won't come back to you. That decision is final. Why? Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is based on love, not inheritance expectations. For 5 years, you treated me like a convenient funding source. I want to see if there's anything left between us beyond financial dependency. Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time, not the calculated manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I never meant for things to go this far. Sorry isn't enough anymore, sweetheart. The whole town watched you, and Harry treat me like a servant in my own home. They watched you choose his demands over my dignity. Words are just words now. I need to see actions. What if I can't do it? What if I can't stand up in front of everyone and admit how wrong we were? then you'll live with the consequences of that choice. Harry will probably leave town to escape his creditors. Men like him always run when things get difficult. You can go with him and start over somewhere else, or you can stay here and try to rebuild your life with honesty. And if I do what you're asking, then maybe over time we can build a real relationship, not based on money or guilt or obligation, but on mutual respect between two adults. Tiffany wiped her eyes with a napkin. How long do I have to decide? Sunday morning. Church starts at 10. If you're not there to tell the truth, I'll know you've made your choice. She stood slowly, looking older and more fragile than when she'd arrived. Dad, do you think you could ever forgive me? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw glimpses of the little girl who used to braid dandelions into crowns and demand bedtime stories about brave princesses. Forgiveness and trust are different things, Tiffany. I forgave you the day I decided to leave rather than fight, but trust has to be earned back, one honest action at a time. She nodded and walked toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of a decision that would determine the rest of her life. I remained in the booth, watching her drive away. Sunday was 4 days away. By then, I would know whether my daughter had the courage to choose truth over comfort, responsibility over loyalty to someone who had never deserved it. Sunday morning arrived clear and cold. I walked into St. Mark's, wondering if Tiffany would find the courage to tell the truth. The sanctuary was fuller than usual. Word had gotten around about some kind of family announcement. I took my regular pew 3 rows from the front and waited. Pastor Williams began the service with familiar hymns and readings, but I could feel the congregation's anticipative energy. When testimony time came, Tiffany stood from the back row. She looked small walking down the center aisle, but her steps were steady. At the podium, she gripped the edges and looked out at faces she'd known her entire life. I need to tell you all something important about my father. Her voice carried clearly through the silent sanctuary. For the past 5 years, Clark Miller has been supporting my husband and me financially. He paid $160,000 for my college education when I could have gone to a state school. He paid $25,000 for my wedding when Harry's family couldn't afford their share. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. These were specific numbers, documented sacrifices that painted a clear picture. He gave us his family home, the house his parents left him, where he'd lived with my mother for 20 years. When we couldn't make mortgage payments, he paid them. When we needed groceries, utilities, car insurance, he paid for everything while living on Social Security. Her voice strengthened as she continued. 3 weeks ago, when my father wouldn't follow my husband's orders like a servant, we gave him an ultimatum: obey Harry or leave his own house. Dad chose to leave rather than surrender his dignity. The sanctuary was completely silent now. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of her words. I stood by and watched my husband disrespect the man who sacrificed his retirement security for our comfort. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father over loyalty to the man who raised me with love and patience. Tears flowed freely now, but her voice remained clear. I'm standing here because my father offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. I was wrong. Harry was wrong. My father deserved gratitude and respect, and instead we gave him ultimatums and demands. She looked directly at me. Dad, I'm sorry isn't enough for what we put you through, but I'm hoping it's a start. The congregation erupted in supportive murmurs as Tiffany returned to her seat. Pastor Williams approached the podium with tears in his own eyes. Sometimes the hardest courage is admitting our mistakes publicly. Tiffany has shown that courage today, and her father has shown us what dignity looks like under pressure. After the service, people approached me with embraces, handshakes, and words of support. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand. We all suspected you were helping them financially, Clark. What we didn't know was how they repaid your kindness. Tom from the hardware store clapped my shoulder. That took real character, what you did. Setting boundaries isn't easy when family's involved, but the most meaningful moment came when Tiffany approached me outside the church. The letter to the Tribune will run Wednesday. The Facebook post goes up tonight. She hesitated. Harry left town yesterday, packed his truck while I was at work, and disappeared. No forwarding address, no note, nothing. I wasn't surprised. Men like Harry always ran when confronted with consequences. I'm sorry your marriage ended this way. I'm not, she said quietly. I filed for divorce this morning, found out he'd been using my credit cards for gambling without telling me. The debts are worse than we thought. 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of my former family home, watching 3 veteran families move into the transitional housing units the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative had created. The house had been renovated into separate apartments, each family getting privacy while sharing common areas. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, recently returned from deployment, directed her 2 children toward the playground equipment donated by local businesses. Mr. Miller, this opportunity means everything to us. Thank you for choosing veterans for this gift. Veterans understand sacrifice, I replied. This house should serve people who've actually earned it. My own life had settled into peaceful routines at the lakeside cabin I'd purchased, with money no longer flowing to ungrateful dependents. Morning coffee on the deck overlooking Flathead Lake, afternoon fishing, evening reading, simple pleasures that felt luxurious after years of financial stress and family drama. The cabin was small but perfectly suited to my needs. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen where I could cook actual meals instead of eating restaurant food constantly, and a dock where I could launch my small fishing boat. My phone buzzed with a text from Tiffany. Dad, I'm 3 months into counseling and learning a lot about healthy relationships. Could we try having coffee sometime? I'd like to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time. I smiled, looking out at the lake where an osprey was fishing in the shallows. Tiffany had kept her word about the public acknowledgments. The newspaper letter had been thorough and honest. The Facebook post had generated dozens of supportive comments from community members who finally understood the real story. More importantly, she was taking responsibility for rebuilding our relationship instead of expecting forgiveness without effort. I typed back, "Coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner?" Her response came immediately. "I'll be there. And Dad, thank you for not giving up on me completely." I set the phone aside and watched the osprey rise from the water with a fish in its talons. Sometimes patience and dignity were rewarded, even when the wait seemed endless. The sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the lake surface gold and orange. In the distance, I could hear children laughing at the veterans' housing complex, families building new lives in the home where I'd learned the difference between generosity and enabling. Justice served, dignity preserved, and maybe, just maybe, a daughter ready to earn back her father's trust through honest effort rather than emotional manipulation. It had been worth the wait. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.